Hi and welcome to another story, and today we have part 9 of Hetty by Jacqueline Wilson, continuing from chapter 19. I stepped out purposefully, though I had no idea where in the world I was going. The fairground smell of onions and fried potatoes made my mouth water. I had no money, but I watched a finicky lady nibble at a cone of fried potatoes, pull a face and toss them to the ground. I darted forward and snatched them up. I wolfed them down hurriedly. That was supper taken care of. It was starting to get dark, so now I needed a bed for the night. I wandered past the noise and glare of the fairground, onto the wild heath. At first there were still couples all around me, strolling through the trees, rustling and giggling in the bushes. But after 5 or 10 minutes walking, I seemed to be all alone. I knew the heath wasn't proper countryside, but it had the same good fresh earthy smell. I stared up at the stars and moon, marvelling in spite of my desolation. I had not seen the night sky properly since I was 5. I held my arms up, as if I was trying to embrace the constellations. I remembered Jem naming some of the stars for me, and my eyes filled with tears. I knuckled them fiercely. I had done enough crying for today. I had to be practical and find a safe place to sleep. In the dark I could not find a hollow tree to turn into a squirrel house, so I found a large bush instead. The ground felt dry and sandy underneath. I crawled under the thick branches and curled up in a ball, cradling my head with my hands. This is better than a squirrel house, I told myself. This is a cosy little burrow, and if I shut my eyes, I shall picture it properly. I pictured a sweet bedchamber with a patchwork quilt of buttercups and daisies and clover. It was very similar to the illustration of the field mouse's burrow beneath the cornfield in my Thumbelina storybook. Oh, how I wished I had my precious gift from Ida with me now. However, I'd read it so many times I knew the story almost by heart. I repeated it to myself, and by the time Thumbelina flew off with her swallow, I was fast asleep. I woke with a start in the middle of the night, cold and stiff and terrified. I could not make my picturing work now. I felt utterly alone, like the last child left on earth. I could not stop myself weeping then. I went back to sleep, wondering if I might not even be better incarcerated in the punishment attic of the hospital. I felt more cheerful when I woke in the soft summer daylight. I rolled out from under my bush, stretched heartily, and strolled about. I had no privy, but it was easy enough to squat behind a tree. Now I needed a washroom. To my delight I found a series of ponds, gleaming silver-grey in the early sunshine. I had no idea how to swim, but I took off my boots and stockings and dress and had a quick splash in the shallows. I had no towel to dry myself, so I ran madly all the way around the pond, and when I came back to my clothes I was nearly dry. I smoothed the creases from my dress as best I could and polished the dust from my boots with a clump of leaves. I let my hair loose, combed it with my fingers, and then replaited it as neatly as I could. Now I needed breakfast. This was more of a problem. I wandered around looking for nuts or berries, but I could not find any at all. Perhaps if I found my way back to the fair, I'd be able to forage for thrown-away scraps. But I'd wandered so far now, I had no sense of direction. I simply walked on, not sure whether I was heading north or south or simply going round in circles. I saw a blue wisp of smoke coming from a small copse, and as I drew nearer I smelled a wonderful savoury cooking smell. I crept closer and came upon a group of dark gypsies in strange bright clothes, frying some kind of meat. I wondered if they might share their meal with me. For a few seconds I even had a fantasy of becoming a gypsy girl and travelling in their caravan and selling clothes pegs and telling fortunes. But their dog barked at me furiously, and a ragged girl, a child, started hurling stones at me. They were clearly not making me welcome, so I wandered on, hungrier than ever. I reached the edge of the heath at last and walked out onto the pavement, feeling strangely disorientated to be back in the town so rapidly. I kept my eyes peeled for dainty ladies throwing away half-eaten food, but they were mostly gentlemen in the streets, walking quickly, glancing at their watches, running to catch omnibuses, obviously off to work. I walked on, peering in at the windows of all the big grand houses. I could sometimes see right down into the basement kitchens with servants scurrying around. I am never going to be a servant, I said to myself, trying to lift my spirits. I am Hetty Feather, and I am not taking orders from anyone. I am as free as the air. I can go anywhere. I can do anything. I can totally please myself. But my spirits still seeped right down into my hard boots, and I was snivelling as I walked, unable to control myself. I was so tired and light-headed, I sank to the ground, leaning against someone's wall. I covered my face with my hands so that folk passing by would not see I was crying, and then footsteps paused in front of me. Something landed in my lap. Oh Lord, was this another child throwing stones? I took my hands away from my eyes and stared at a big bright penny shining on the brown stuff of my dress. I looked up and a kindly-looking lady nodded at me. "There, dearie," she said, and went on her way. She thought I was a beggar child. My face flamed red, but my hand grasped the penny. "Thank you so much, ma'am," I called after her. Perhaps her gesture inspired the other passers-by. Maybe they hadn't even noticed me before, but now my tear-stained face attracted attention, and another penny soon landed in my lap. A farthing, and then a halfpenny, soon a whole jingle of copper coins. Oh, my lord, this was easy. I could sit here at my leisure and look mournful, and folk would pay me. But then I saw a dark uniformed man in the distance, a helmet on his head. I was pretty sure he was a policeman. I was also pretty sure that begging was against the law. I gathered my coins into my fist, scrambled up and ran off as fast as I could. I careered down long roads of houses, my throat aching, my heart jumping in my chest, not even daring to look around in case he caught me. I feared the police had prisons, and I did not want to end up in a cell. Then I came to a parade of shops and dared to pause at last. The policeman was nowhere in sight. I loitered in front of every shop window, and then came to a stop outside a baker's shop. The smell of freshly baked bread brought a flood of water to my mouth, and I felt faint. I stared at the cakes and buns on display in the window. There were slabs of the pink and yellow cake, Madame Adeline's favourite, and white iced fancy cakes, and red and green and yellow jam tarts, and all manner of golden latticed pies and glazed buns, shiny and soft and curranty. I had no idea how much such wonders would cost. They could be sixpence each, even a sovereign for all I knew. Perhaps the woman in the white apron inside the shop would scoff at my impertinence if I proffered my small handful of coins. But I was so hungry I decided to risk it. I opened the door and stepped inside. "If you please, ma'am," I started shyly. "Yes? I'd like to purchase a little cake, or maybe a bun." "Well, make your mind up, dear," she said, but she didn't sound too impatient. "Perhaps a cake, the pink and yellow one, and a bun," I suggested, and then I anxiously showed her my coins. "Do I have enough money?" "More than enough, dear." She put my cake and bun into a white paper bag, twirled it round so that the corners were twisted fast, took 2p halfpenny from my hand, and gave the bag to me. "Thank you kindly, ma'am," I said. She laughed a little then. "You've got the best manners of any street child I've ever come across before," she said. "Goodbye, dear. Take care of yourself." I could take care of myself. I had found a place to sleep, a place to wash, I had earned lots of money, and now I could breakfast like a queen. I ate my cake and bun, and when I came to a tea stall, I bought myself a large mugful for another penny. And then I went marching on, refreshed and renewed, peering all about me. I found myself wandering in more huge parkland. For a moment I thought I was back in Hyde Park because I heard an elephant trumpeting, but I discovered I was near the Zoological Gardens. I peered through the railings and saw an elephant even larger than Elijah with a curved seat on his back. 10 or 12 children were strapped into the seat, while another boy rode bareback on his neck, his boots nudging the beast's great ears. I had a desperate desire to ride an elephant too. I paid 6p to get into the zoo, and another 2p for a ride. This was the last of my money, so I was very much hoping that the ride would be worth it. I queued impatiently at the landing stage, amongst a great crowd of girls and boys, waiting until at last it was my turn to be hoisted onto the great grey creature. "I am very good at riding. Please may I sit on the elephant's neck?" I begged the keeper. "Don't be silly, missy, you're a young lady," said the keeper, and he put one of the boys on the elephant's neck. The boy nodded at me triumphantly, pulling a silly face. Other boys shrieked and squirmed beside me, jostling for the best position on the seat, but I was adept at elbowing my way when I wanted. One of the other girls was hopelessly squashed, however, with 2 rude boys practically sitting on top of her. "Move next to me," I said. She smiled at me timidly. She was beautiful, just like a fairy tale princess, with big blue eyes, rosy cheeks, and long golden curls. She wore a cream silk hat and a matching silk dress, with white stockings and white kid boots, and with tiny blue buttons. "Come on, wriggle past those silly boys," I said, reaching out and grabbing her. She squeezed past them, and I pulled her safely down next to me. I could feel her trembling violently. "What's the matter?" I asked in astonishment. "I'm frightened," she said. I didn't know if she was frightened of the elephant, frightened of heights, or frightened of the rude boys, or simply frightened of getting her pretty pale clothes dirty. I reached out and held her hand. "There now, no need to be frightened. I'll look after you," I said. "My name's Hetty. What's yours?" "I'm Rosabelle," she said. I sighed. Trust her to have a beautiful name, too. The elephant was fully loaded now, so the keeper gave him a little tap and we set off, plodding down the path. The boy shrieked loudly and Rosabelle clutched me as if she would never let me go. "Oh dear, it's so scary. I wish the beast wouldn't roll so," she gasped. She peered down desperately. "I've lost sight of my mamma and papa. Can you see yours?" "I would have a job seeing either." "I'm here on my own," I said proudly. "Without even your nurse," said Rosabelle. "I don't have a nurse any more," I said. "I'm too big." "No, you're not. You're little. Much smaller than me," said Rosabelle. "Oh, there is mamma. I see her lilac parasol." She risked letting go for the second and attempted a little wave. I stared at her mother. "She is very young and beautiful," I said wistfully. Her papa was waving too. He looked a kindly, jolly man with a pink face. "Papa is pleased with me for taking the elephant ride. He feels I am too timid," said Rosabelle. "But mamma says all girls are naturally timid." "I'm a girl, and I'm not the slightest bit timid," I said. "Perhaps we could be friends, and then you could teach me how to be bold and independent," said Rosabelle. My heart leaped. Maybe Rosabelle's family would take me under their wing. I could be a devoted companion to their little daughter. They might even adopt me like Polly. I wasn't sure I should be happy wearing cream silk dresses and fancy hats and white boots. I knew how dirty they would be by the end of the day. Maybe they would let me choose a darker colour for my clothes, red or blue or purple. Any colour so long as it wasn't sludge brown. I didn't hunger after dolls and toys, but I was sure a cosseted child like Rosabelle would have a whole shelf of storybooks, and I could share them. I was still eagerly picturing my future with Rosabelle as the elephant plodded back up the path to the landing stage. I kept hold of Rosabelle's hand and helped her down carefully. "Rosabelle, over here, my dear," both parents called. I trotted over with her, but the mamma suddenly looked horrified and even the papa appeared grave. "Say goodbye to the little girl, dearest," said the mamma very firmly. "She is my new friend, Hetty," said Rosabelle. "Don't be ridiculous, Rosabelle. She's just a dirty street child. Leave go of her hand. You should never have let her get so near to you," said the mamma. The papa turned on me. "But be off with you," he said, swatting at me. If they thought I was a street child, I would act like one. I stuck out my tongue and waggled it hard before running away. My feelings were hurt nevertheless, but I diverted myself by inspecting all the creatures in their cages, the scampering monkeys, the pacing lions, the savage bear in his pit. I felt sorry for all those poor caged animals. I wanted to set them free so that the monkeys could snatch up all the flimsy parasols, the lions could leap at all the scornful parents, and the bear maul them to pieces. I was starting to feel sorry for myself too, walking around alone in my hideous brown frock and boots, while all the well-dressed families stared and sniggered at me. Even the rude boys were here with mammas and papas, big happy families, many of them picnicking on the grass. I stared at their checked tablecloth spread, with pork pies and whole chickens and egg and bacon tarts, and wondered about darting in like a dog and snatching something. But then, what would the woman in the baker's shop say about my manners? I might be a beggar now, but I was not going to be a thief. I sat myself down on the grass and looked mournful, hoping that strangers would start flinging pennies at me again, but it seemed to be the wrong sort of place. People had come to the zoological gardens to observe the animals, not a small stray child. Folk passed me by without even giving me a second glance. I decided I'd have to move further afield if I wanted to earn enough for my supper. Most of my generous donors had been gentlemen. I needed to get away from this family environment. I figured that there would be more gentlemen in the centre of town, so I left the gardens, walked out of the park and continued on my way. I wandered back towards Oxford Street and Regent Street, my empty stomach clamouring now, and both boots rubbing my feet sore and bloody. Finally I had to stop and take my boots off altogether. I was sitting on the curb, airing my dirty toes, my boots neatly beside me, stockings tucked inside, when two boys came dashing up. One hollered something unintelligible right in my face. I shouted back furiously. He punched me in the chest, and I aimed a kick at him with my bare foot. He pushed me hard so that I fell, and he and his friends scurried off. I sat up gingerly, cursing them. I cursed even more when I went to put on my boots again. They had vanished, stolen by the two scheming boys. I cried a little then, because I knew how much I needed those boots, even though they hurt me. My genuine tears brought me a little consolation. 2 more gentlemen gave me pennies, but when I got to my feet to look for another baker's shop, I realised I was in trouble. The pavements were hard, with sharp stones, whereas my feet were soft and blistered raw. I could not walk far now. I bought myself a meat pie from a street stall and wolfed it down, though the meat was all fat and gristle and the pastry limp. I thought of Ida and her delicious pies. She had been such a true friend to me, yet I'd been so very unkind to her. She would hate me now, if she ever thought of me. She'd have Sheila for her pet. She'd give her tiny culinary treats and save up to buy her a special Christmas present. I felt miserably sick at the thought, or perhaps it was the meat pie. My bladder was also bursting. I wandered up a dark alley off Regent Street to find somewhere private so that I could relieve myself. I found myself in a wide square with a garden full of city men, smoking and larking and taking the air. There were girls too, some ragged and barefoot like me, offering posies to the gentlemen, begging them to buy their flowers. There were a couple of older girls too, their lips painted carmine, like Madame Adeline's, wearing lurid dresses and showing a lot of petticoat. They kept approaching the gentleman, seeming to be begging too. I hesitated, wondering if I should try too. "Clear off, you ginger knob. This is our patch," one girl yelled at me. Another girl gave me a hard push. "You're too young. Give way for your elders and betters," she said, cackling with laughter. These weren't girls I dared tangle with. They were bigger and rougher than the street boys who had stolen my boots. There was a sharpness about their pinched, painted faces that frightened me. I ran away up another darker alley and then lifted my skirts and used the gutter, jumping when a rat leapt out at me. A girl and a gentleman came blundering down the alleyway, arm in arm, whispering together. Their words made me feel sicker than ever. I dodged round them and scurried back to the square, desperate to reach the wide public street once more. "Are you all right, little un?" said one of the flower sellers, a softer-looking girl in a shabby blue print dress, carrying a big basket of flowers. "Yes, thank you. I'm perfectly fine," I said, though I knew I must look wretched and tear-stained. "You don't look fine." "I wouldn't stay around here. It's not a good place for a little girl like you," she said. "Here, do you want a posy?" She picked out a tiny bunch of 3 rosebuds, their stems carefully wrapped around with ribbon so that their thorns were covered. "It's beautiful. I'm afraid I have no pennies," I said. "I don't want no pennies. It's a gift to cheer you up," she said. "Thank you very much. You're very kind," I said, sniffing the sweet roses. "Off you pop," she said. "I wouldn't even loiter around here. Go straight home. You're too little to be out on the streets." I nodded and smiled at her and turned on my way, comforted. I went back down the alley towards Regent Street, but a gentleman stepped out of the shadows right in front of me, making me jump. He was a very grand gentleman, with a fine hat and coat and fancy silver brocade waistcoat. He could surely mean me no harm. "Hello, my dear," he said softly. "What a lovely nosegay. May I buy it?" "If you please, sir, it's not really for sale," I said. "No? But I will pay you a lot of money, a shilling, 2, maybe half a crown." I stared at him. He did not seem a foolish man at all, quite the opposite, so why was he willing to pay a fortune for 3 little wilting roses? I wanted to keep them for myself because the flower seller was so kind to me, but I could feed myself for days and days on a half a crown. He saw me hesitating. "You're clearly very fond of your flowers, child. Never mind, you keep them. I'll tell you what, I have a house nearby with a very pretty garden. I will take you there and you can pick a whole armful of roses." "It's very kind of you, sir, but—" "No buts, my dear. You must come with me. You're trembling. I had better find you a soft shawl to keep you warm, and stockings and shoes for those poor little bare feet. Oh dear, they do look sore." He bent down and stroked my feet, fondling my toes. I did not like this one jot and stepped backwards, but he had hold of my ankle. I stumbled and he caught me, lifting me right up in his arms. "No, please, put me down, sir," I said, struggling, but his arms were strong and his hand clamped over my mouth. "Shush now, little girl. No crying. You will be fine with me," he said, walking rapidly. I tried to bite the hand over my mouth, but he held me so tight I couldn't move my teeth. I couldn't even draw breath to scream. But then something went bang right on his head. Someone kicked him hard between his legs, and he groaned and dropped me. A hand snatched mine. "Quick, run!" I ran for my life, hanging on to her hand. It was my kind flower seller. She had hammered the man with her basket and then kicked him with swift expertise. She tugged me up even darker alleys and then pushed me into a shadowy doorway. We flattened ourselves in the recess, listening hard, but could hear no footsteps. "There, I didn't think he'd follow us, but you never know," she said. "What was you doing, going off with the likes of him? Couldn't you tell he was up to no good?" "Yes, but I didn't know how to get away." "Yell out and give them a good kicking. That's what you do. You don't want to go near gentlemen like that." "It was so kind of you to rescue me, and you've dropped half your flowers. We'll retrace our steps in a little while and see if we can find any. Don't you worry. What's your name, little un?" "Hetty Feather." "I'm Sissy, dear. I'm 14. She said it as if she was quite grown up. She did indeed look years older than the big girls at the hospital with their prim frocks and plaits. "How old are you, Hetty?" 10. Nearly 11. She didn't seem surprised. "Ah, Lil's 10 too. She's about your size, bless her. She usually sells flowers along with me, but she's poorly just now. She's got a way of looking all big-eyed so that the gentlemen melt." "Can I help you sell flowers today?" Sissy looked me up and down. "I don't see why not. You need someone to look after you. There's gentlemen and gentlemen. You need to work out which is which. Not that I can always tell," she sniffed. Still, I might work on the street, but I like to think me and Lil keep ourselves respectable. If ever I'm tempted otherwise, I just think of mother." "Is your mother—" I hesitated delicately. "She died 2 years ago, and the last baby died with her. She were wore out, poor love." "Do you have a father?" "Yes, we do, but we'd be better off without him," Sissy said bitterly. "What about you, Hetty?" I shook my head. "Haven't got a father or a mother," I said. Sissy plucked at the stuff of my dress. "So, is this some kind of orphan uniform?" I felt I could trust her. "I used to live at the Foundling Hospital, but I've run away." "Ah," said Sissy, nodding. "Were they cruel to you there?" "Ever so cruel," I said firmly. "Well, you stick with me, girl, and I'll learn you some tricks. Let's have a look at you now." She scrutinised me carefully, and then wet her finger, rubbed it across the grimy wall, and marked under my eyes with soot. "That's better. If you look really ill, the gentleman will feel sorry for you. Can you look really sad, Hetty?" "I'm brilliant at it," I said, lowering my head and letting my mouth droop. "Yes, you're a natural, almost as good as our Lil." "I can cry too, if you like." No, you'll smudge the soot and end up looking like a chimney sweep. "Right, my dear, let us see if we can gather up these posies." She held my hand tight. "Don't worry about that gentleman, Hetty, or any others that ilk. I'll be looking out for you now." We found the spot where Sissy had valiantly attacked the vile foot-stroker and gathered up as many fallen flowers as we could, though some had already been trampled underfoot. "We'll soon sort them out," said Sissy, kneeling down and arranging them deftly. "Lovely moss roses these are, and gentlemen will pay a penny for a little posy. They make a sweet little surprise for a lady, my posies do. That's how me and our Lil do better than most of the other girls. We don't just sell flowers, we make 'em look special. When we sell our violets in the spring, we bind them with green leaves and a tiny piece of lace or ribbon. We beg them from this milliner who used to know our mother. Then we make such a pretty nosegay. Some gentlemen might even pay 3 pence to show their ladies it's spring at last." "How pretty," I said, trying to copy Sissy, prinking the drooping little roses and arranging them just so. "That's right, Hetty. You're getting the hang of it already. Come with me then, girl. We'll go down St. Martin's Way. The gentleman won't pay so much, but it's safer there. Don't want no nasty men making off with you again, do we, Hetty?" I trotted along beside Sissy and sat with her on the steps of a great church by a huge square with fountains and vast lion statues. It was so crowded I wondered if the Queen was returning on another Jubilee procession, but Sissy said it was simply folk coming out to go to the theatre and the halls. Most of them ignored us, though I looked extra mournful, and Sissy accosted them energetically. "Come on, sir, buy a lovely posy for the missus. Beautiful moss roses, freshly picked. Make a girl happy. Only 2pence, what a bargain!" It was a novelty at first, and I enjoyed myself, but then it started raining and everyone hurried by under umbrellas, not even glancing in our direction. I hoped Sissy might give up, but she sorted the few coins in her pocket anxiously and said we had to stay. "We need at least another shilling, Hetty. Hopefully twice that," she said worriedly. "But you could buy a big meat pie and buns for you and your Lil with the money you've got," I said, hoping she'd spare a few pennies with me too. "Bless you, Hetty. It's not just a question of money for our food. I have to make the wherewithal tonight to buy fresh flowers from the market in the morning. These will all be withered by then. And then there's father to consider. He'll start fretting for his drinking money. If I don't get home with enough for his beer, he'll take it out on me and our Lil." She took a deep breath. "Maybe I'd be better going back to where I was. I reckon I could earn a couple of quick sixpences there. You could stay here, Hetty, and I'll come and collect you, I promise." I wasn't quite sure what she meant, but I clung to her nevertheless. "No, Sissy, stay. We'll get the money here." I cast my eyes around. I was used to weighing up the hospital visitors on Sunday, working out who might be generous with sweets. I saw a portly middle-aged couple and took a chance. I snatched a posy and ran up to them in the pouring rain. "Oh, please, ma'am, sir, would you care to buy one of my pretty posies?" They seemed taken aback. "What are you doing in the rain, child? And barefoot too? Why don't you run along home?" said the lady. "Oh, I daren't, ma'am, for my father will beat me viciously if I don't take him money for his drink. And then there's our Lil too, she's poorly." I decided to embellish things a little. "And then there's my sister Sheila. She's got the smallpox and is hideously disfigured. And my sister Monica, who's been kicked by a horse and is very dim-witted now." I started going through half the dormitory at the hospital, inventing ailments and misfortunes galore. I took care to keep my tone tragic and my face a mask of mournfulness. But to my astonishment, the lady and gentleman started laughing. "Pete off with you, you naughty minx. You should not tell such stories," said the lady. "Yes, it's very bad of you to try and con us, but here's a little something for your cheek," said the gentleman. He fished in his pocket and handed me a couple of coins. "Oh, thank you kindly, sir. I said, bobbing him a curtsy. I thought he'd handed me a couple of pennies, but when I opened my fist, I saw it was 2 shillings. "Oh, Hetty, you're a marvel," said Sissy, giving me a hug. "There, you've brought us luck. We can indeed go home now." I stood still. "But I have no home," I said. "You come along with me," said Sissy. "You can stay with Lil and me for now." "Won't your father mind?" I asked anxiously. "So long as he's got enough to drink, he don't mind anything," said Sissy. "Come on, little Hetty. Come home and meet our Lil. She'll take a shine to you, I'm sure." Chapter 20. Sissy led me through a maze of dark alleyways to her home. They were so dark that I kept stumbling on the uneven cobblestones, and when I tried walking in the gutter, I stepped in something unspeakable in my bare feet. I hoped I might be able to have a proper wash at Sissy's house, but when we got there at last, it came as a rude shock. I was not a fool. I knew Sissy was very poor. I hadn't pictured her in a palace. I'd thought she would live in a very modest house, rather like the country cottage where I'd lived with my foster family. But Sissy's family didn't have their own house. They had one room in a large, bleak, 5-storey tenement building, the bricks black with grime, the window glass mostly missing, the roof partly collapsed. I stared up at it in horror. "Is it falling down?" I asked. "It soon will. It's been condemned a while now, so the rent's cheap. Do you want a pee first? We're up 4 flights of stairs, so it's a good idea to go now if you want to." There was no proper privy, just a stinking hole in a tumble-down shed in the backyard. Judging from the smell and the slime on the walls, folks simply tipped their chamber pots out of the window. There was a tap over a drain. Sissy turned it on for me so I could sluice my feet, but only a dribble of water came out. "That tap's no use. Never mind," said Sissy. "I'll go up to the pump at the end of the street later on and bring a jug back." There were cockroaches crawling along the dark corridor of the 4th floor. Sissy stamped on them with her boots, while I walked on tiptoe, agonised. She opened the door of the room right at the end. It was very dark, but I could see it was pitifully small and barely furnished. There were 2 thin mattresses on the floor, and a rickety chair and a stool. Someone had hung sacking curtains at the narrow window and worked a rag rug for the floor. But these were the only homely touches. A big, slovenly man sprawled on one mattress, while a little girl huddled on the other, coughing and coughing. "Lil, oh dearie, shh, now, shush. Here, darling, take a drink," said Sissy, hurrying to her side. She helped Lil sit up and held an old tin cup to her lips. "There now, my lovey, this will help," she said. "Cough, cough, cough, it drives me mad," said the father, scratching his head. "She only does it to annoy, I'm sure. Man, can't you never have a little nap for that cough, cough, cough? Clear your throat, Lil, and then shut up." He rubbed his eyes and then blinked at me. "Who's this? Clear off out of here, this ain't your room." "Hush, father, this is my new little friend, Hetty. She's brought me luck. She's a dab hand at flower selling, almost as good as our Lil. Look what she's earned for us." She held out one of the silver shillings. He snatched it, bit it hard, and then shoved it in his pocket. "Well, I'll be off for a little constitutional," he said, not giving me a second glance now. "I'll just stretch my legs and maybe take a drink to ease my parched throat. I'll be back within the hour." He stuck his feet in his old broken boots, clapped a greasy bowler hat on his tousled hair, and made his way over to the door. "Within the hour," Sissy muttered. "We won't see him till midnight, and good riddance. There now, Lil, take another sip. That's my good girl. Give Hetty a smile, dearie. Show her that someone in our family has good manners." Lil tried valiantly to master her cough. She was a tiny scrap of a girl, her eyes very large in her peaky face. Her hair was limp and bedraggled, but tied up jauntily with a bright red ribbon, which sadly emphasised her eerie pallor. Her eyes popped as she coughed, her whole face contorting alarmingly, but as soon as she could draw breath, she grinned at me. "Hello, Hetty. Oh, my lord, look at your red hair. That's a queer dress. Do you like it? How old are you? Do you have a mother? How much did you get for one posy? I got 3p one day because the gentleman took a shine to me." "Now, Lil, give Hetty a chance to answer," said Sissy, laughing. "She don't see many folk now, Hetty, so that's why she's so excited to see you. You have a little chat with her while I run out for more water and some supper." She jingled the coins in her pocket. "We'll have a treat tonight, girls." I sat on the edge of Lil's mattress and let her question me relentlessly. I told her all about the Golden Jubilee, and Madame Adeline at the circus, and my night on Hampstead Heath, and the zoological gardens, and the horrid gentleman who seized me before Sissy rescued me. Lil listened, wide-eyed. "Dear Sissy, she's always looked out for me, and she'll look out for you too, Hetty," she said. "When I die, perhaps you can be a comfort to her." Her words came as a total shock. I blinked at her anxiously, not knowing what to say. "I'm sure you'll get better, Lil," I mumbled. No, I'm coughing blood. That means you're dying. Can't fool me," said Lil. I'll miss Sissy so when I'm dead. And she will miss you too, Lil. Terribly, but at least you'll be with your mother then, I said, trying to be comforting. I'll be with mother? Lil echoed. Oh, I should like that very much. Are you sure, Hetty? Certain, I said, trying to sound convincing. Your mother is up in heaven, and when you die, you'll be an angel with her. An angel with wings. Will I be able to fly? Lil asked. Oh, yes. You'll have great feathery wings and be able to fly all over heaven. Sometimes you might swoop down to earth and see Sissy and make sure she's all right, I said, warming to this theme. Oh, I'd love that. Will she be able to see me, or are angels invisible? She might just catch a glimpse of you, or hear you whispering her name, I said. I'd never glimpsed my brother Saul, or heard him calling me, but I had sometimes felt a poke in my ribs, as if he'd prodded me with his old crutch. Lil spread her arms and flapped them like wings, but the effort made her start coughing again. Oh, Lil, don't cough so, I begged, frightened that she might die then and there in front of me. I tried to give her the murky water in her cup, but she just choked and spluttered. I patted her helplessly on the back, feeling her sharp little shoulder blades under the thin stuff of her nightgown, almost as if she was already sprouting small wings. There now, said Sissy, bursting into the room, bringing with her a warm, savoury smell. Oh dear, Lil, here's some fresh water. Clever girl. Hetty helps to rub her back. Now, Lil, see what a feast I've got, and some more of the nice medicine. Oh, how it will soothe your poor chest. We're going to get you better and running about in no time. It was clear that Sissy wouldn't have any truck with talk of dying and angels. She held the medicine bottle to Lil's lips and made her swig a mouthful between coughs, and it did seem to help a little. And then Sissy unwrapped a waxed paper parcel to show us 3 large potatoes and a quantity of fried onions. We seized a potato each and munched ravenously. They tasted very good, though they were not quite the great treat I had expected. What did they feed you at this hospital place? Bread and water? Asked Sissy. Yes, they did give me bread and water, I said, remembering my night in the punishment attic. Was they really cruel to you, Hetty? Asked Lil. Really, really cruel, I said. Did they beat you with a big stick? Well, they had whips, I said. Whips, said Lil, her eyes round. Did they whip you till you bled? They were always threatening to whip me, I said. It sounded a little lame. They once locked me up in a little attic room, all day and all night, and that was far worse than being whipped. Imagine, Lil, being shut up in a tiny room, a total prisoner. My voice trailed away, because Lil could imagine it all too well. Did they go out and get sodden drunk and then come back and beat you in a fearsome rage? Asked Lil. I pictured Matron Bottomley and Matron Peters glugging from a gin bottle. It was such a bizarre idea I couldn't help laughing, and dear Lil laughed too. No, they didn't drink, but they frequently got into fearsome rages, especially with me. Did they all hate you, Hetty? Yes, well, both matrons did. Some of the nurses were all right. Nurse Winnie was very kind, but the teachers were very cruel. Miss Morley once beat my friend Polly with a ruler, and I snatched it away and beat her back, I said, getting a little carried away. You had teachers, said Sissy. Did they learn you to read and write, Hetty? Could you teach our Lil? She's very bright, I know she is. If she could only read, it would pass the day for her. They had no books or paper, but I improvised, writing on the bare floorboards with a sooty stick. Sissy squashed up beside us on the mattress. I taught them A and B and C, making them sound out each letter. When Lil succeeded in spelling out cab, we clapped her. She got so excited she jumped about, and that started her coughing again, very badly this time, as if she would never stop. Sissy held her close and gently laid her down when she stopped at last. There now, my little Lil. No more excitement for today. You go to sleep, dearie. You should try and sleep too, Hetty. I lay down beside Lil on the mattress, fully clothed. I had no nightgown, and I could not take off my frock, as I would reveal I had no underwear. Have you read lots of books, Hetty? Said Sissy. How about telling Lil one of the stories, to help her get off to sleep? Once upon a time, there was a very little girl no bigger than my thumb, I started. She was so tiny she curled up every night in a walnut shell. We all curled up too and went sound asleep until the girl's father came stumbling into the dark room. I felt Sissy tense, and Lil gave a little frightened whimper as he staggered over to our mattress. He bent over us, smelling horribly of beer. All tucked up like little birds in a nest, he mumbled, slurring his words. Good night, my chicks. Sheep, sheep. He laughed at his own joke and then crawled on his hands and knees to his own mattress. He fell on top of it and was snoring heavily in seconds. Thank the Lord he's happy drunk rather than roaring for a fight, Sissy whispered. We never know how it will take him. Does he get drunk every night? I said. If he has the money. He's been so much worse since Mother died, said Sissy. She sounded much younger now and despairing. He used to work at the docks, but he can't hold down a job. The state he's in. I have to earn to keep us all. I never make quite enough. I'll help you, Sissy. I'll look proper mournful tomorrow, and we'll make a fortune, you'll see, I said. Sissy got up before dawn, moving slowly and softly so as not to wake Lil. Sissy, I whispered. I'm off to market to buy flowers, she murmured. I'll come with you, I said, though I was dizzy from lack of sleep. I was already dressed and I seemed to have given up on washing, so I was ready in an instant. It was raining, which made my lack of boots particularly uncomfortable. My feet were numb from walking across the slippery cobblestones. It was a struggle keeping up with Sissy. We walked to the huge market at Covent Garden, abuzz with activity, though it was still dark. Even though I was exhausted, I paused to marvel at all the wagon loads of peas and potatoes, the barrows and carts piled high with tomatoes and lettuces, the great baskets scarlet with cherries and strawberries. There were people fresh from the country, tall men in smocks like father, round, red-faced women like mother, reminding me painfully of long-ago times. Sissy tapped me gently and we walked on to the flower market. Again I was dazzled, my eyes stinging with the shock of such bright colours, sunny yellow asters, hot orange pokers, fat pink peonies, blue and deep purple lupins, my nose wrinkling with the overpowering smell of roses and great white lilies. Sissy sprang into action, bargaining with last night's money until she had a huge basket full of flowers. Then we sat beneath the big arcade, fashioning the flowers into bright bouquets and tiny posies. I tried to help her, though I still felt light-headed and my hands were clumsy. When at last we were done, she spent her last penny at the coffee stall, sharing the hot drink with me. We had no more money for buns or rolls, but Sissy kept a sharp eye on the floor of the fruit market and snatched up a discarded withered apple and a bruised pear, providing us with a meagre breakfast. We went to the steps of St. Martin's, but another older flower seller was there already, and she wouldn't let us stay too. Sissy tried Charing Cross Station, but again we were too late. We had to go to the square off Regent Street, though Sissy made me sit close beside her, and whenever any weird-seeming gentleman paused, she put her arm around me protectively. There weren't too many gentlemen, weird or otherwise, because the rain was relentless. I wasn't really cold because it was summer, but I felt chilled right to the bone, and by afternoon my stomach was rumbling pathetically. Are you hungry, Sissy? I asked. I'm always hungry, she said, but you get used to it. I wasn't sure I would ever get used to this. Selling flowers had been a novelty yesterday, but now it was so tiring and tedious. Buy, my sweet flowers, sir. A posy for your lady. Only a penny. Go on, sir. There's a gent. I'd gabble, but nearly always they walked straight past, ignoring me. I didn't have to rub soot under my eyes or adopt a mournful expression. I'm sure I looked genuinely ill and exhausted. Please, oh, please buy my flowers, I begged, but I could have been a sparrow cheeping for all the attention I attracted. Then a plain lady in charcoal grey paused nearby. She watched while Sissy and I accosted each passing gentleman. I wondered why she was lingering. Did she want a nosegay to brighten her severe outfit? I smiled in her direction. Would you care to buy a posy, ma'am? I asked. She shook her head, and I drooped a little more. Are you a regular flower seller, child? I do not recollect seeing you here before. She was looking at me strangely. What are you doing here? She's with me, missus. She's all right, said Sissy protectively. She looks a little tired, said the lady. I am, ma'am, I said. If you buy some flowers, we'll be able to buy a bite to eat. We've had no breakfast today, nor dinner. Are you both very hungry? She said. I have an idea. Perhaps you would like to accompany me to a nearby tea shop. My heart jumped. A tea shop? Oh, how I longed for a cup of tea and a bite to eat. But Sissy was looking dubious. We ain't got the wherewithal to go in no tea shop, she said. I will happily pay for you, said the lady. Oh, Sissy, please, do say yes, I begged. She still seemed reluctant. What's the catch, eh? She asked. The lady smiled. Yes, you're right, Sissy. There is a catch. I would like to ask you a few questions. What about? Sissy looked alarmed. Look, missus, we brought our flowers fair and square from Covent Garden Market. I've got a regular pitch. We don't get no hassle from no one, not even the police. We're totally honest and respectable. We never go off with no gentleman. I'm sure you're right. I'm not here on any official business, I promise you. I'll be frank. I'm a writer. My books are published by the Religious Tract Society. They are stories of street children, very much like you. What's your name, then? Sarah Smith. Sissy looked at me. You read books, Hetty. Have you ever heard of her? The only children's writers I knew of were Mr. Anderson and the two Mr. Grimms. I had no idea that ladies could write storybooks. I looked at Sarah Smith with great interest. She was staring back at me. So, you can read, Hetty, she said. Who taught you? Ah, I had to be a little careful now. I could not breathe a word about the hospital, or she'd act like Madame Adeline and want to take me straight back. My brother Jem taught me, ma'am, I said, truthfully enough. And where is he now? I lost him long ago, I said sadly. So what is your name, child? Hetty Feather, ma'am. She nodded as if she approved of my name. Then do please come with me, Hetty, and you too, Sissy. I simply wish to ask you a few questions to use as background for a new story of mine. I'm thinking of calling it A Penny for a Posy. Do you like the title? It will be all about little flower sellers like you. Could you put us in your story, ma'am? I asked excitedly. Could you use our names? Oh, I should so like to be in a real storybook. I don't want my name in no storybook, said Sissy. She made it clear she was only accompanying me on sufferance. We made our way out to the busy thoroughfare of Regent Street. I thought we would go to a humble tea shop full of working folk, but Miss Smith made for the door of a grand restaurant, all great glass windows and a gilt decoration. We can't go in there. We'll get chased away, said Sissy. It's much too grand for the likes of us. Certainly the waiter at the door was looking us up and down and glaring. Sissy was neat enough in her print dress, but her hair was straggly, and she wore men's boots with their soles flapping. I looked even worse by now. My hair a tangle, my brown dress dirty and crumpled, my bare feet filthy. We're too shabby, miss, I said. Nonsense, said Miss Smith, taking our hands. She led us into the restaurant, giving the waiter haughty directions. We would like a table for 3, please. Could we have the menu brought straight away? My companions are very hungry. The waiter bowed reluctantly and ushered us to a table right in the corner. He held a chair out for Miss Smith and then hesitated. Miss Smith coughed reprovingly. The waiter sat Sissy and me down too, though he grimaced as if he'd been asked to seat 2 monkeys at the zoo. He made a particular to-do over Sissy's flower basket, trying to take it from her. Sissy hung on to it determinedly. I'll put these in the cloakroom for you, miss, he said. No, you don't. I want them where I can see them. Anyone could help themselves to the cloakroom, said Sissy. Yes, that basket will be fine at our feet under the table. The flowers smell heavenly, said Miss Smith. The waiter did as he was told, though he raised his eyebrows and sighed. Sissy jutted her chin out and glared back at him, but she was biting her lip and fiddling with a lock of her lank hair. She stared at the gleaming knives and forks on the white tablecloth before us, clearly unused to copious cutlery. The waiter handed us 3 large menus. Sissy stared at hers, blinking rapidly. What would you like? Said Miss Smith. You can have anything on the menu. What's your favourite food, Sissy? Sissy shrugged her shoulders, seeming ungracious because she simply did not know what to say. I glanced down the long list of items, utterly astonished at the choice. I'd had no idea you could select whatever you wanted in a restaurant. I would have liked to linger over my choices, picturing each dish, but I knew I had to help Sissy as tactfully as possible. The words on the menu were just elegant squiggles to her. If you please, I would like the steak and kidney pudding, I said. Would you like that too, Sissy? Sissy nodded dumbly. Miss Smith summoned the waiter back and ordered 2 meat puddings for us and a little fish for herself. Then she poured us a glass of water each from a crystal carafe. Sissy and I drank thirstily while Miss Smith sipped. She started asking Sissy questions, perhaps trying to put her at her ease. How long have you been selling flowers, Sissy? Since I was little. And what do you do in winter when fresh flowers are in short supply? Sell oranges. Is your mother a flower seller too? No, miss. She sewed stuff. What sort of seamstress was she? I dunno. And what about your father? Sissy sniffed, not bothering to reply. Miss Smith persisted gently, but Sissy's answers became more and more monosyllabic. Then our dinners arrived, and all our attention was taken by the steak and kidney pudding, a great soft suet mound stuffed with choice meat and oozing with gravy. There were potatoes too, and carrots and peas, a big plateful. I waited cautiously in case Miss Smith wanted to say grace, but Sissy simply sat, stunned. You may begin, girls, said Miss Smith. I picked up my knife and fork, and Sissy copied me, though she held the knife in her left hand and the fork in her right. I did not like to tell her in case I embarrassed her. She struggled with the cutlery, but still managed to eat with gusto. I was surprised to see the inroads she made on her pudding almost immediately. Then I realised she'd transferred half of it to the napkin in her lap. I guess she wanted to take it home for Lil. I hoped it wouldn't ooze gravy too soggily. Now, Hetty, it's your turn to sing for your supper, said Miss Smith. Tell me about your life. How did you come to be a flower seller? What did you do before that? Start right from the beginning. Sissy looked anxious, but I smiled serenely. I felt Miss Smith had been shortchanged by Sissy, who hadn't provided her with any telling details for her penny for a posy story. I decided to do my best. I could not tell the truth, of course, and relate my own story. I could picture a much more colourful tale. I was born in the country, but my dear mother died when I was born, I began. Father went to pieces and started drinking. Wasn't so bad when he came home merry, but he could get into fearsome tempers sometimes, and we all trembled in our beds. Sissy stared at me, astonished that I was appropriating her father. I carried on determinedly, picturing for all I was worth, inventing a cruel stepmother who sent me off to work in a loathsome factory when I was only 8, and a grasping landlord who cast us out onto the streets. I told of 2 evil women, Miss Peters and Miss Bottomley, gin-soaked old harridans who harassed us most dreadfully. To give my story a little variety, I had a magical episode when I joined a circus and performed nightly in a magnificent equestrian act. I continued this alternative life history throughout my steak and kidney pudding and talked non-stop through a plum tart and custard, and then a cup of real coffee and a little dish of chocolates. Sissy stayed silent and open-mouthed, only fidgeting when I told Miss Smith the prices of flowers and my favourite Covent Garden supplier, because I was clearly getting a few of my facts wrong. I was not deterred, however. So long as I spoke fluently, filling in many little details, I was absolutely certain I was convincing. Miss Smith seemed to think so anyway. She took copious notes in her black notebook. "There," I said eventually, feeling that I had certainly earned our splendid dinner. "Will you put some of my story in your book, Miss Smith?" "I am very tempted," she said, closing her notebook and smiling at me. "However, I think you should write your story, Hetty. You are far more inventive than I am. I rather suspect your story is pure fiction from beginning to end, but twice as interesting for that very reason." I blinked at her. What do you mean?" I said. "She means she knows you're telling whopping great lies, Hetty," said Sissy, standing up. She had a napkin of suet pudding carefully tucked under her shawl. She reached for her flower basket. "Come on, little un. Time to scarp her." "No, wait, Sissy. I haven't paid for you, for your time," said Miss Smith. She fumbled in her reticule and brought out 2 silver half-crowns and a little card. "This card is my name and an address on it. It is an office off the Strand where we are setting up a rescue society for young girls on the street. If you show anyone the address, they will be able to direct you there. You will always be sure of a warm welcome, and if you ever find yourself in need of new accommodation or an alternative occupation, we will do our best to help you. Now off you go, my dear. Thank you so very much for taking care of Hetty, but she is in my charge now. I will take her back to the Foundling Hospital." I stared at her. How did she know? I hadn't breathed a word to her about the hospital. I looked at Sissy. "You didn't tell her, did you?" "Of course I didn't," said Sissy. She looked at Miss Smith. "She can't go back there, miss. They're dreadful cruel to her there. They whip her and lock her up in attics." "Do they, Hetty?" said Miss Smith. "Answer truthfully now." "They will quite definitely lock me up if you take me back there now," I said. "We will see about that," said Miss Smith. "Don't worry about Hetty, Sissy. I promise I will make sure she's all right. You have clearly been very kind to her and looked after her well, but I don't think she could survive on the streets without you." "I'll say," said Sissy. She pocketed Miss Smith's coins, eyes gleaming at the thought of what they could buy in the way of treats for Lil. "Take the card too, please, and do not hesitate to use it," said Miss Smith. "Thank you kindly, miss." Sissy took the card and then lugged her flower basket off the floor. "Have a posy, do, and you truly won't be too hard on Hetty. She was only romancing. She tells lovely stories. She can't seem to help it." She handed Miss Smith her biggest bunch of roses, gave me a quick peck on the cheek, and then lumbered out of the restaurant with her basket, taking care to bump into the supercilious waiter on her way out. I could not bear to see her go. I got up to run after her, but Miss Smith had hold of me. "No, Hetty." I started crying. "Poor Sissy truly does have a dreadful father, and they don't have enough food, and there's a little sister, Lil, but she's very ill. I think she's dying." I wept. "I swear I'm not picturing now, Miss Smith." "I know. Sissy seems a brave, resilient girl, but she certainly has a very hard life. But tell me, Hetty, do you really want that life for yourself? You know you don't belong on the streets." "Perhaps that's true, but I don't want to belong to the hospital," I said. "I still don't understand how you knew I came from there." "Your distinctive name has been on many people's lips since your disappearance on the trip to Hyde Park. You have been mentioned in the newspapers," said Miss Smith. "Really?" I said, rather thrilled. "But how did you know I was Hetty, the Foundling, when you saw me selling flowers?" "Oh, come now. The Foundling uniform is very distinctive, even without your cap and tippet. And oh dear, what happened to your boots?" "Two horrid boys stole them." "There, you see, you're not safe to be on the streets. You need to be properly cared for in the hospital." "They don't care for me there," I sniffed. "You don't know what it's like, Miss Smith." "Yes, I do. At least, I have an outsider's view. I used to visit on Sundays with my brother, Peter, though I always felt uncomfortable staring at all of you while you ate your Sunday dinners." I stared at her pale, serious face, her plain charcoal grey dress. I remembered Harriet's beloved, The man with the tie pin in the shape of a pea. Oh, I remember you now. Yes, and I remember you. The cross little red-haired girl with the big friend who fluttered her eyelashes at my foolish pop of a brother, said Miss Smith, laughing. Don't look abashed, Hetty. I think you had every right to be sulky in those particular circumstances, but I am concerned that you hate the hospital so. I've recently been invited onto the board of governors because of my rescue work with children and my books for the Religious Tract Society. I thought the Foundling Hospital an excellent institution in most respects. The children all seem well nourished and healthy, their food is fresh and simple, and I am particularly impressed that everyone receives a decent education and proper training. But all the girls are trained to be servants, I said. There is nothing wrong with being a skilled servant, Hetty, said Miss Smith, shaking her head at me. I sniffed again, lolling back in my chair. You wouldn't care to be a servant, Miss Smith, I said impatiently. I agree. I would sooner be a writer, she said. But I wasn't joking when I said that you could be a writer too, Hetty Feather. You have a very vivid imagination and a gift with words. Your invented life history was immensely entertaining. But you didn't believe me. I think if your story was down on paper, you might write with true conviction. Do you think I could really have one of my stories published in a book? Not yet, for a while. I can't quite promise you that, Hetty. We will have to see. You will have to work hard, practicing your art. Try writing for at least half an hour each day. I can promise I will keep in touch with you and do my best to help you. But I have to go back to the hospital. You do indeed. Matron Bottomley will be so very angry with me, I said. I dare say, but I will do my best to protect you. Miss Smith gave me a most unladylike wink. I am a governor now, Hetty. Your Matron Bottomley has to answer to me. Miss Smith gave the money for our sumptuous meal to the waiter, who had been hovering for quite a while. I saw how much money it was. My goodness, writers must earn a great deal, Miss Smith, I said with keen interest. Do not get too excited, Hetty. Many writers earn a pittance, or cannot sell their work at all. You might well have to earn your keep as a servant while you hone your craft. I shall start honing for all I am worth, I said. If Ida is still talking to me, I shall beg for her for a whole stack of kitchen paper and start writing my story straight away. Ida? She works in the kitchen and has been my dear friend ever since I arrived at the hospital, but I've not been a dear friend to her. I don't think she will like me any more now. I'm sure she will, Hetty, but just in case, it might be prudent to make a little purchase before we take you back to the hospital, said Miss Smith. She took me by the hand and let me up Regent Street and along a little arcade. She stopped outside a stationer's shop. There were wondrous marble notebooks in the window, patterned with swirling combinations of colour, some sky blue and purple and pearly pink, some silver and emerald and jade, some scarlet and vivid orange and gold. Oh, I exclaimed, looking at them in awe. I ran my finger over the glass window, following the flow of the design. I know the pattern is abstract, but does that swirling shape remind you of anything? It looks like feathers, Hetty, said Miss Smith. How felicitous. You must select one of the notebooks, and perhaps you need a pen. I have an excellent quill pen given to me by my long-lost friend, Polly. Oh, Miss Smith, might I have my very own bottle of ink? I asked. We went inside the stationer's and I deliberated deliciously over each and every notebook. Perhaps the purple was the prettiest, the shades of green the most pleasing to the eye, but I chose the notebook with scarlet and orange swirls picked out in gold because it was as bright as the hair on my head. The stationer parcelled it up in a special canvas satchel with a bottle of black ink in its own little leather pouch for safe keeping. Miss Smith and I had been acquainted for a matter of hours, but I threw my arms about her and kissed her pale cheek. She hailed a hansom cab and asked the driver to take us to the Foundling Hospital. I clutched my wondrous present and tried to feel brave, but when we drew up outside the great gates of the hospital, I was trembling. Courage, Hetty, said Miss Smith. The gatekeeper boggled as we climbed out of the cab. Oh, my lord, it's the missing child, he exclaimed. Indeed it is, said Miss Smith. Come along, Hetty, dear. Let us seek out Matron Bottomley and tell her your sad tale. Now, Hetty, quick, give me a very brief and truthful resume of the last 2 days. I told her about going to see the wrong circus in Hyde Park, and my omnibus journey to Hampstead Heath, and my encounter with Madame Adeline, and my night under the bush, and my begging in the street, and my ride on the elephant in the zoological gardens, and my alarming encounter with the weird gentleman, and my rescue by dear Sissy, and subsequent night in her room in the condemned house. I kept it utterly concise, with no picturing whatsoever, but we had to take 3 turns of the grounds before my tale was fully told. My goodness, Hetty, you certainly had your fair share of adventures. My poor fictional heroines lead very dull lives by comparison. said Miss Smith. Matron Bottomley will be so angry. She'll lock me in the punishment attic for a week, I said fearfully. Wait and see, child, said Miss Smith. Come now, let us confront her. We went in through the girls' entrance. The infant foundlings were filing off to the privies after their darning session. They stopped and stared at me, clutching each other. Oh, wonders, Nurse Winnie cried, dashing up to us. It's Hetty Feather back from the dead. Oh, Hetty, God be praised you're safe. She seized hold of me and whirled me around and then gave me a kiss on both cheeks. There, Hetty, now tell me, is she one of the cruel nurses who beat you? Said Miss Smith, as we proceeded along the corridor towards Matron Bottomley's room. Nurse Winnie is a darling, I admitted, but wait till you meet Matron. She will not be thankful I am back from the dead. She will very likely wish me dead, and buried, and burning to a crisp in hell. Miss Smith knocked on Matron Bottomley's door and pulled me inside. Matron Bottomley's head jerked up at the sight of me. Her mouth opened comically. She took in my ragged, unkempt state, my missing cap and tippet and apron, and my filthy bare feet. She took a deep breath. Hetty Feather, she said, I knew you would be the child to bring disgrace to the Foundling Hospital. If you only knew the trouble you've caused. We have never had a child run away before. Oh, no, you are very much mistaken, said Miss Smith quickly. Do let me introduce myself, matron. I am Sarah Smith, newly elected to your board of governors, and very happily I rescued Hetty myself. She did not run away, I assure you. She was captured by a band of brigands at the fun fair at Hyde Park. They chloroformed the poor child and kept her trussed up in an attic, ready to be shipped overseas. Miss Smith leaned forward and hissed dramatically. The white slave trade. But I happened to be in the area reporting on slum dwellings, and I heard their desperate screams. I rescued her, and she begged me to take her back to the hospital. I hope no long-term harm has been done to her, but I fear her confinement will prey on her mind. She must never be confined in a locked room again. Her nerves would never stand it. It was my turn to marvel at Miss Smith's picturing. I practically applauded when she insisted I must not be locked up. I'm not sure how much Matron Bottomley truly believed, but Miss Smith was a governor, and she could not accuse her of lying. I feel Hetty Feather is a child of enormous creative potential. I have given her a notebook in which to write. I shall come and visit her regularly and examine her work, said Miss Smith. I am sure I can rely on you, Matron Bottomley, to make sure Hetty is not parted from her notebook. I know you have her welfare at heart. Oh, glorious and devious Miss Smith! Matron Bottomley still hates the very sight of me, but she allows me to write in this notebook. She has not locked me in the punishment attic, though I'm sure she was sorely tempted when Madame Adeline paid a visit to the Foundling Hospital to make sure I'd returned safely. I have been writing my own story this past year. Miss Smith has been writing too. A Penny for a Posy has already been published. I have my own copy dedicated thus to Hetty and Sissy, and in memory of Lil. Miss Smith tracked them down and paid for a doctor to attend poor little Lil, but sadly he could not help her. However, Miss Smith's rescue organisation has found Sissy decent lodgings away from her father, and she is now being trained as a milliner, making neat nosegays for bonnets, so her story ends happily too. This is my story, and I promise it is not a work of fiction. I have tried hard not to exaggerate and embroider too much. Miss Smith says very complimentary things about my writing, but says I have a tendency to be too fanciful. But sometimes the truth is stranger and more wondrous than fiction. I have kept the very best part till last. I have found my mother. I wonder if you have guessed who she is. I had a very thorough bath the day I returned to the hospital, and I was given a brand new uniform and new boots too. I walked into the dining room for supper, and a general hubbub broke out, with girls clapping and crying, because everyone had been convinced I'd disappeared forever. Even Sheila and Monica clasped me close. Little Eliza was beside herself, leaping up at me like a little monkey, her arms about my neck. However, it was Ida who reacted most dramatically. She took one look at me, turned white as a sheet, and fainted dead away. She had to be carried bodily out of the dining room by 2 nurses and taken to her room. Her shoe fell off as she was dragged away. I snatched it up and cradled the ugly black brogue as if it was Cinderella's glass slipper. I must return Ida's shoe, I mumbled to a nurse, and fled from the dining room, even though I had not had any supper. I followed the nurses and poor Ida through the kitchens and down a long corridor to the cramped servants' quarters. Ida's room was as small as the punishment attic and almost as bare. The nurses laid her down on her truckle bed. Ida murmured my name. Yes, Hetty Feather's here. She has scared us all, but she has turned up like a bad penny, said one nurse. Fancy you taking on so, Ida. "You're a kind heart," said the other nurse. "There now, you'd better rest. Come along, Hetty. Leave Ida to recover." "Mayn't I stay for 5 minutes just to make sure she doesn't swoon again?" I begged. "I was so very mean to Ida, and I feel so bad about it now. Please, let me tell her how sorry I am." The nurses laughed at me, but let me stay. "Oh dear Ida, please be all right," I whispered. I smoothed the hair off her forehead and stroked her temple. Her eyes opened. They looked very raw and bloodshot. "Oh Ida, your eyes look so sore," I said, concerned. "Have you been crying?" "Of course I've been crying," Ida said. "I've been fair demented these last 2 days. I've been out searching the streets, both nights trying to find you. I thought I'd truly lost you. I couldn't bear it. I feared you'd run away because you thought I favoured Sheila when I was simply making a fuss of her to spite you. And no wonder. I was so horrid to you. Please forgive me, dearest Ida. You mean the whole world to me," I declared. Fresh tears welled in her poor eyes. "Oh, Ida, don't," I said, and I hugged her hard, burying my head in her bony shoulder. Her hands reached up and she wound her fingers in my red hair. My little Hetty, my own child," she murmured. I raised my head. "What did you say?" I whispered. Ida wiped her tears with her fingers, keeping her face covered with her hands. Nothing, she said. I took hold of her hands and gently pulled them away so I could see her properly. I looked deep into her eyes and saw the truth. "You are my mother," I whispered. "Hush, Hetty, hush, no one must ever know." But I saw the strands of our hair side by side on the pillow, Ida's light brown locks and my fiery red ones. "Your father has red hair," Ida whispered. I clasped her hands. "Tell me," I begged. "His name's Robert, but everyone calls him Bobby. He was the brightest boy in our village, and I loved him with all my heart, though he did not truly care for me. He left to go to sea and voyage around the world." "And where is he now, my father?" "I truly do not know, Hetty. He never came back. He swore he'd write to me, but he never did. I waited and waited for him to return because I realised I was having his baby." "Me?" "Yes, you, Hetty." Her arms went around me, holding me tightly. I did not know what to do. I didn't tell a soul, but soon I became so big that people started to notice. My parents could not stand the shame, turned me out. "Oh, Ida, I was so lonely, so frightened, I didn't know what to do," she said, clinging to me. "I gave birth to you all alone. You were so terrifyingly tiny, but oh, so precious. I held you close in my arms all day long and felt I could never ever let you go, but I had no way of supporting us. I did not dare farm you out to some woman while I worked. You were so small and sickly. I knew you would not thrive unless you were cared for most particularly. So I decided it would be best if I took you to the Foundling Hospital. I wish you could have kept me, Ida." "I wish it too. It was an agony to give you up. I missed you so badly. I nearly lost my mind with wretchedness. I ended up in the workhouse, changing my name so that no one should ever know. It was very hard there, but I did my best to bear it. Eventually, the mistress helped me find a position as a kitchen maid. I worked in that post for a year, but when I knew you were due back from your foster home, I applied for work at the hospital. It was my only way of being near you, Hetty. I could never earn enough to buy you back, and the governors would not deem me a fit mother anyway." "You're the most fit mother in the world, and the only one I could ever want," I said fervently. "It's been such a secret joy these past 5 years, watching you grow, but a torment too, unable to give you a true mother's love. I resolved never to tell you. If anyone found out, I'd be sent away in disgrace." "Oh, Ida, I will keep our secret, I swear," I promised. "But could you tell me just one more thing? Did you give me a name when I was born?" "I called you a fancy pet name, Sapphire, because your eyes were so blue." "Oh, my lord, I pictured that. I knew my real mother would have chosen a beautiful name for me. Listen, Ida, I hope to be a writer one day. I'll have my stories published, and then I shall use Sapphire as my pen name. You're not laughing at me, are you?" "No, my darling. I'm crying because I'm so happy. We will leave the hospital together when I'm old enough, and my stories will earn lots of money, and I'll find us a fine house, and we will live there together, mother and daughter. Just you wait and see. Happily ever after. Like the fairy stories," said Ida, still weeping. "Happily ever after," I declared. "I am absolutely certain." And that is the end of Hetty Feather by Jacqueline Wilson. Really hope you enjoyed that story, guys. I'll be back soon with lots more stories and videos coming soon on my channel. If you'd like to subscribe or hit a like, it's always appreciated. Thanks for listening, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.